Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for another update from the Offshore Wind team here at NYSERDA. There's been a lot of interesting developments in 2022, and while we still have participants joining us, joining the webinar now, I think we're going to get kicked off and started. We have a lot of information to present to you today. My name is Greg Landman. I'm the Director of Offshore Wind here at NYSERDA. Can I get the next slide, please, Sal? I think we want to start today with just an overview of the Offshore Wind team. There's been some adjustments here at NYSERDA with the staff involved with Offshore Wind, and so I want to do a couple of introductions to some new folks you may not have met through these webinars. So first, George Sassine has come on board as the Vice President of Large Scale Renewables at NYSERDA. I have shifted positions, previously acting as the lead for the Environmental Research Program and being a part of the Offshore Wind team, but this past January have been appointed as the Director of Offshore Wind, taking over for Adrian Downey. Later today, you'll hear from Cheryl Huber, who is our Offshore Wind Contracts Manager. She will be presenting some information about our existing portfolio of contracts and their status. Layla El Ashmawi is our Procurement Manager for the draft RFP that was released late last week. She'll give you some insights into our thinking on the RFP. And finally today, we'll have Jessica Deely, who will be speaking with you about our stakeholder engagement process and our workforce development. Our portfolio here at NYSERDA for offshore wind has gotten so large that we really can't present updates on the entire portfolio in a single hour. So we're going to try to rotate our updates to include different topics of interest for this as we go forward. So later this year, you'll be hearing from Peter Lyons, who works on our supply chain and economic development benefits efforts, Kate McClellan-Press, who leads our environment and wildlife interactions, and Morgan Brunbauer, who is our fisheries manager and works with our commercial and recreational fishing industries. And then later this fall, we expect to have Jan Herndon back with us. She's been on leave, but she'll be picking up again as our outreach and engagement manager. If you have any questions for folks in the team, please feel free to reach out to us. There's a generic email address on here, offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov. We'd be happy to respond to any questions there. And additionally, our website has a lot of the information we're going to be presenting here today, and we would encourage you to look there as well. Get the next slide, please. So not knowing what meetings you're coming out of to join us, we wanted to just set the stage again with the state's clean energy goals. Go ahead one, Sal, please. Important to note that earlier this year, the New York State Climate Action Council released a draft scoping study of what it would take to achieve nation-leading Climate Act goals for New York State. One of those goals is 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2040, but we also have a far-reaching goal of an 85% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050. The draft scope from the Climate Action Council is out for public comment now on their website, but it suggests we may need upward of 20 gigawatts of offshore wind energy in order to satisfy the clean energy, the Climate Act for New York State. I say that as a backdrop for some of the other activities that we're picking up and building our portfolio. Can I get the next slide, please? But we are focused on the near-term goals, which is 9 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2035, and have released a draft RFP to try to pursue that. Next slide, please. Some interesting developments coming out of the Governor Hochul's office of the state of the state. She is really leaning into the economic developments associated with clean energy across New York State, and some of the issues, the critical issues that we need to tackle to make sure that we can achieve these goals in a way that's cost effective and responsible. You'll hear a little more about our $500 million that the governor has included in her executive budget, and how we're thinking about using those to leverage the market to bring as many economic development benefits to New York State as possible. The governor also set a minimum goal for us of 2 gigawatts of procurement in this round. Our cap to get to 9 is 4,600 megawatts, so we're looking to procure somewhere between 2,000 and 4,600 megawatts in the solicitation that we plan on releasing later this spring. We've instigated a process to understand more about what constrains cables and transmission to bring offshore wind energy to shore, and we'll be talking about that later. And then later this summer, we'll be talking a bit more about our Offshore Wind Master Planning 2.0, focused on deep water. This effort is really aligned with the larger plan coming out of the Climate Action Council suggesting this 20 gigawatt goal. We're thinking well beyond the 9. That's the baseline in our current law, but we're thinking, how do we extend this to make sure that we can achieve the full complement of our renewable energy benefits for New York State? Next slide, please. And we're likely very excited by the federal government's activities in this space. I'm sure most of you know, earlier this year, The BOEM leased 6 new wind energy areas in the New York Bight. These were areas that were included actually back in NYSERDA's work in the early days of offshore wind master planning. So they're a subset of the areas that we identified for consideration by BOEM. As a result of this auction, we have 4 new developers working in the space. We're really looking forward to additional insights and additional opportunities with new developers. And BOEM is estimating between 5.6 and 7 gigawatts of capacity in these areas. And our expectation is that's a fairly conservative number. So we think we can these new developers can extract more than this minimum number. Also excited by our joint announcement with BOEM and New Jersey, looking to advance a regional working group to support supply chain development to assure that good paying jobs and a durable domestic supply chain is brought to the region and delivers benefits to underserved and disadvantaged communities in both New York and New Jersey and around the region. BOEM has additionally advanced 7 new lease sales elsewhere in the country. They've been proceeding at a Herculean pace, moving permitting around many of the projects that have been advancing from the site assessment plans to their constructions and operations plans, and also really excited by federal investments in the space to support port development. That's just a backdrop. I know I'm moving through these quickly, but I wanted to go quickly into some of the key updates that we wanted to provide to the whole group. So get the next slide, please. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cheryl Huber, I'm sorry, to talk about the existing projects and their status and updates. Cheryl.
Thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cheryl Huber, Offshore Wind Project and OREC Contract Manager with NYSERDA's Offshore Wind team. I'm pleased to be joining this webinar to provide an overview of New York State's offshore wind portfolio to contextualize our program's role in helping the state achieve those renewable energy and climate goals that Greg just spoke of, and to provide key updates leading into New York's next offshore wind solicitation. Next slide, please. Currently, New York is leading the nation with 5 offshore wind projects in active development and 5 ports to support these projects. Our projects include Empire Wind 1 and Sunrise Wind from our 2018 Offshore Wind Solicitation, along with Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind from our second solicitation held in 2020. Together with South Fork Wind Farm, previously procured by PSEG and LIPA, New York State holds over 4,300 megawatts of offshore wind procurements to support New York's grid. Through our first solicitations, New York is already investing more than $644 million in public and private port infrastructure funds to support these projects. As shown on the map, in the Hudson region, the Port of Albany and Port of Coymans are set to be manufacturing hubs for the state, while downstate staging, assembly, operations, and maintenance will be located closer to the wind areas themselves. These activities are planned for South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, Port Jefferson Harbor, and Montauk Harbor. All told, these port infrastructures developments are attracting long-term supply chain investments in these industries for New York and providing a solid basis for substantially more activity to follow. This overall portfolio of projects will result in the creation of 6,800 direct jobs with over $12.1 billion in economic activity. New York companies from Long Island to New York City and the Capital Region are increasingly being utilized for the development of New York offshore wind projects through the various maturation phases of development, including planning, onshore and offshore construction, and component manufacturing. Already, 2022 has proven to be a banner year for offshore wind in New York State. The first 2 months have seen several federal, regional, and state milestones that solidify New York's climate leadership and this new national industry's foothold in our region. Just a few weeks ago, as Greg discussed, BOEM held a record-breaking auction for 6 new lease areas in the New York-New Jersey Bight, bringing new and incumbent offshore wind developers to the region. Through this process, BOEM, New Jersey, and New York are working together to advance common interests and shared values of economic prosperity and energy resilience in the creation of the joint domestic offshore wind supply chain that Greg also mentioned in the previous slide. New York State doubled its offshore wind portfolio with the finalization of our contracts and economic commitments for Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind. Governor Hochul announced our 3rd offshore wind solicitation to be held this year with a $500 million state investment to support industry and job growth for New York State. And South Fork Wind Farm received federal approvals to begin construction, making it the first project set to deliver offshore wind energy to New York's grid. And it's only March. Next slide, please. Taking a deeper dive into our first two competitively priced offshore wind solicitations. Each awarded project has brought with it a decrease in costs to New York ratepayers. The 2020 awards for Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind saw 7% lower project costs than the 2018 awards, proving the strong growth of the industry. Once completed, these projects will power more than 2.4 million New York homes while creating 6,800 jobs for our communities. These projects commit more than $12.1 billion in economic funding for New York State, supported by $730 million in combined private and public funds. New York's approach of enabling public-private partnerships is driving marquee investments in ports and manufacturing. Of the $644 million in port infrastructure money mentioned earlier, $357 million will go to supporting the nation's first offshore wind tower manufacturing facility at the Port of Albany, and $287 million for staging and assembly at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. These various partners are driving the development process of these marquee projects to construct ports with enough weight-bearing capacity required to deliver on our current and future projects as components to continue to grow in size. Next slide, please. These next few slides provide more detailed information about each New York project. Southwark Wind Farm, developed by Ørsted and Eversource, is scheduled for operation in 2023 and is on track to be the first commercial offshore wind farm in the nation. Southwark received federal approval of its Construction and Operations Plan, or COP, as you might hear me say, in January of this year, and state interconnection and port permitting approvals last year. The 132 megawatt project will feature 12 turbines located 35 miles east of Montauk Point, connecting to East Hampton Substation and powering 70,000 New York homes. Operations and maintenance for the project will take place out of Montauk Harbor. The COP approval outlines the project's 1 nautical mile turbine spacing and mitigation measures to protect marine habitats and species. BOEM's final approval of the COP follows the agency's November 2021 issuance of its Record of Decision, which concluded the thorough BOEM-led environmental review of the project. Ørsted and Eversource reached these provisions and protections working closely with a range of external organizations and experts to help ensure coexistence of ocean users. Fabrication of the port's offshore substation is already in process. Ørsted and Eversource recently announced the selection of Kiewit Offshore Services to design and build the substation for the project. The 1,500-ton, 60-foot-tall substation will be built at Kiewit's facility in Ingleside, Texas, near Corpus Christi. More than 350 workers across 3 states will support this Southwark Wind structure, which will be the first U.S.-made offshore wind energy substation. Onshore construction has begun with Hogland Energy Group as the selected contractor to conduct onshore ductwork and transmission line interconnection to the grid. Offshore construction of monopile foundations begins next summer. Next slide, please. Sunrise Wind will follow Southwark Wind by delivering offshore wind energy in 2025. This 924 megawatt project, located 30 miles east of Montauk Point, just south and east of Southwark, consists of 102 turbines, enough to power 600,000 New York homes. As shown here, the project has a South Shore landing at Smith Point County Park and an overland route to interconnection at Holbrook Substation in Brookhaven Township. Operations and maintenance activities for this project will be located out of Port Jefferson. This project will support approximately 800 New York State and union jobs with component manufacturing in upstate New York at the Port of Coymans and downstate with operation centers in the Port Jefferson and East Setauket area. An additional $10 million investment is being made to create the National Offshore Wind Training Center in Suffolk County. High levels of New York local content will be delivered with this project. The use of material and labor within this scope will contribute significantly to fulfilling our local content commitment and economic development in the state of New York. A consortium of Siemens Energy Acre Solutions has been awarded as Tier 1 suppliers for the HVDC scope of the project, covering the offshore wind substation, onshore converter station equipment, and related commissioning work. Sunrise Wind entered into a charter contract with Dominion Energy for an offshore tower and turbine installation vessel compliant with the Jones Act. The Port of Coymans will be used for advanced component manufacturing, also known as secondary steel foundation components. Advanced foundation components represent $86 million supply chain contract with Riggs Distler and Ljungstrom. Fabrication of advanced components will occur in Wellsville, New York, employing 100 highly skilled manufacturing technicians here and at the Port of Coymans. Sunrise Wind is under federal and state permitting review for environmental impacts and transmission interconnection. The project received its notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement from BOEM in August of last year, following public scoping opportunities held last fall. Next slide, please. Also, as part of our 2018 award, Equinor and BP are developing the Empire Wind 1 project. The project design consists of 73 15-megawatt Vestas wind turbines located 15 to 30 miles southeast of Long Island and interconnecting to the Gowanus substation in Brooklyn. Staging, operation, and maintenance activities will be based out of South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, with product component manufacturing at Port of Albany with Marmon Wellcon beginning next year in 2023. This project will support 500 short-term jobs and 300 long-term jobs in the capital region. A $5 million community workforce benefit fund has also been established, and CARP Strategy selected as facilitator for the Ecosystem Fund Strategy Committee in partnership with New York City Economic Development Corporation. Federal and state permitting are ongoing for this project for both the onshore and offshore aspects of construction and operation. Public scoping for the environmental impact statement associated with Empire Wind 1, 2, and the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal occurred last year and is under development by BOEM. Next slide, please. Finalized earlier this year is the Empire Wind 2 project, set to follow Empire Wind 1 with commercial operations beginning in 2027. This 90-turbine project will be located at the farthest end of the New York lease area, connecting to the Barrett substation in Oceanside, New York, and powering over 1 million New York homes. As with Empire Wind 1, product component manufacturing will take place at the Port of Albany and operations and maintenance activities from South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. This project adds an additional 1,000 short-term jobs and 200 long-term jobs in New York by 2028, with substantial community investments planned over the lifetime of the project. Federal permitting activities have begun with Empire Wind 1, and state interconnection applications are expected this year. Next slide, please. New York's fifth offshore wind project, set to deliver over 1 million New York homes with renewable energy by 2028, is Equinor and BP's Beacon Wind project. Located 60 miles east of Montauk Point, this project will have the longest cable route of the aforementioned projects, connecting to the Astoria Queens substation via the Long Island Sound. Geophysical and metocean studies are underway to inform federal and state permitting applications, which are expected later this year. This project will also be supported by manufacturing and assembly activities at both the Port of Albany and South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, with an additional $47 million committed for local and community funding. Next slide, please. These industry milestones are occurring now or are set to take place over the next 5 years. Sunrise Wind and Empire Wind 1 are slated for commercial delivery in 2025 and 2026 respectively, followed by Empire 2 and Beacon Wind in 2027 and 2028. With nearly half of our 9-gigawatt state goal slated for commercial delivery by 2028, New York is well positioned to add additional projects to our offshore wind portfolio to reach our 2035 goal. The sequential phasing of our projects helps to stabilize market demand and pushes for a consistent pipeline of supply chain opportunities. As New York companies continue to develop and grow their business plans with offshore wind, initial focus should be placed on growing industry knowledge and determining where their competencies align with industry, and be prepared to engage with industry on those specific component or service offerings. As those opportunities are recognized through the various phases of development, engagement with primary service providers and primary component manufacturers provides a path through a supplier qualification process to enter the industry and connect with partners that are engaged with New York developers and other regional projects. Next slide, please. This is a great place to transition to our third New York Offshore Wind Solicitation. I would like to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Leila El Ashmawy, to continue today's webinar.
Thanks, Cheryl. And quick reminder to everyone, if you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A function in WebEx, and we will get to all the questions at the end. So how will we build on this portfolio Cheryl just presented? I'm Leila El Ashmawy, and I'll be speaking to you all today about NYSERDA's third offshore wind procurement round, or OREC RFP. This is our third solicitation of deciding which projects to purchase on behalf of the state. I'll be sharing with you what are the types of things we ask for of the developers and what are the priorities and areas of evolution for New York's offshore wind program. Next slide, please. Thanks. So when you see the price trends Cheryl presented, that is buying so much more than clean electrons. We are building an industry in a responsible way that supports research and science, that is done smartly so that we can capture the maximum cost effectiveness over the lifespan of the program. And that involves intentional building of a regional supply chain that supports long-term jobs and stimulates our economy. And we are very intentional about stakeholder engagement and having this be an inclusive industry. Next slide, please. So that's our vision. And what is the timeline of that vision? We released a draft of the solicitation documents, the OREC RFP 22-1, last Friday, as Greg mentioned. It is live on our website. That was on the title slide and I think might be coming back up at the end. The draft is open to comment by stakeholders and the public, and the final version of the request for proposals is planned for sometime in Q2 2022, depending, of course, on the feedback, approvals, or other external factors that is still subject to change. But this is happening now. And I hope the information presented today is timely for folks to keep track and stay up to date on what is happening in New York's offshore wind program. Next slide, please. This request for proposals is a reflection of many programmatic evolutions and step changes. So how are we growing our thinking along with growing the portfolio? First, Governor Hochul announced the intention to commit $500 million in New York State funding towards offshore wind supply chain. I'll lay out our plan for that funding in a moment. This next request for proposals includes really the latest and greatest in offshore wind transmission and includes energy storage. So a lot of grid advancements and what we consider to be the first step in a series of next steps that get us to the grid of the future in our clean energy vision. The solicitation provides a pathway for the governor's priority to repurpose aging fossil fuel infrastructure downstate. And brand new is the requirement of a New York jobs and labor plan, an emphasis on stakeholder engagement. There's added priority to underserved and environmental justice communities. And we also address changes in New York State public service law with many added wins for labor. So to anchor this discussion, we get a lot of questions, and to keep in the forefront of your mind, hopefully answer those questions from the start. How are these proposals evaluated? All the proposals are scored based on 70% price, 20% economic benefits, that's jobs and investments in New York State, and 10% viability. I know you're a sophisticated audience and I don't need to point the obvious here, but price is a major driver of project selection, and the robustness, benefits, and holistic approach are also key differentiators. Next slide, please. I mentioned Governor Hochul announced the intention to put $500 million in New York State funding for offshore wind supply chain. This is subject to the New York State budget bill approval next month, but to give you all an idea of how would we allocate these funds to maximize benefit to New Yorkers, our concept is to achieve the highest collective benefit by distributing the $500 million across 3 separate processes with sequential timing and targeting marquee investments all the way down to local businesses and subcomponent manufacturing. Each of the 3 processes, the funds will be in the form of grants, and we would select projects based on the quality of the investment. So job creation, job retention, and the highest ratio of private to public dollars. That is, for every dollar of public funds, the private funds matched should be a multiple. The first bucket that you see here is roughly $300 million. And this is for investment plans paired with the offshore wind proposals. So bidders are required to submit an investment plan as part of their base offshore wind proposal, and those investments go towards primary components that support the build out of the offshore wind industry. So we're talking ports, blades, cables, and nacelles, and those support hundreds of jobs and unlock significant private investment. The second bucket that you see here is for marquee investments of similar size and scope to the investment plans paired with the offshore wind solicitation. However, this is more of a standalone supply chain request for proposals. So the manufacturer or facility doesn't need to be paired with an offshore wind developer. And that lends itself to projects which are designed to serve many developers or for good supply chain investments that just weren't paired with a winning offshore wind proposal. So it's an alternate pathway. This last bucket will come at the end of the sequence, so after the supply chain only request for proposals and after the offshore wind proposal, and it is dedicated funds to support local manufacturing and existing New York businesses. This is for subcomponent manufacturing or service providers, and it services our state's small to medium enterprises. Next slide, please. Also new in this request for proposals are enhanced transmission designs. What that means is we're figuring out how to build a future, smarter transmission grid for all New Yorkers. For reference, currently our electricity is generated onshore, close to the demand center. And for New York City and Long Island, that means the generation is right in the heart of highly populated areas. Now we're talking about moving a significant amount of electricity the other way, so bringing energy from offshore to onshore. One challenge we face is the urgency of climate change means we must move fast at implementing New York's climate goals. So we need to keep pace with growing our offshore wind portfolio to hit that 9 gigawatt target, to give certainty to the supply chains to localize. But at the same time, transmission planning requires broad coordination that is beyond any one agency or any one project. So to allow that planning process to play out and make sure what we are building is most compatible in that future, we're asking developers to implement an enhanced transmission design today that will be no regrets in the future. We have two key changes addressing this. First, projects will be what we are calling meshed ready. What this basically means is that each wind farm is built today, connecting to the grid, and its offshore substation is built today with adapters so that at some point in the future, they have the ability, the compatibility and the operability, and we have the option to connect 2 or more wind farms together offshore. That would be at some point in the future. Secondly, we've outlined our preference is for HVDC export cables. That is basically the big extension cord taking the power from the offshore substation to its onshore point of interconnection to the grid. We have a preference that this cable uses HVDC technology for it can carry more power, a longer distance, and taking up a smaller space. So that's good for the grid and it's good for the environment. So win-win. Next slide, please. More on grid benefits. As we're integrating more renewables into the grid and working towards the Climate Act goals of 70% renewable electricity by 2030 and beyond, energy storage becomes very important. So as a complementary technology, energy storage can be included as an optional addition to offshore wind project proposals. So it's totally optional to include, and if it is included, the electrical storage should be located downstate in New York City or Long Island. We're doing this to try to capture grid benefits. Storage on the grid allows for integration of more renewables, but also brings benefits like alleviating congestion and reducing curtailments. Next slide, please. Totally new in this round, we are requiring developers to submit jobs and labor plans. That includes metrics for tracking and holding proposers accountable to their commitments to create and sustain New York jobs. That is on top of our commitment to ensure as many opportunities as possible resulting from these offshore wind projects are presented to New York businesses and New York community members, including historically marginalized or environmental justice communities. We prioritize economic benefits, that's that 20% I mentioned, that enable participation from New York manufacturing sector and commit to providing local suppliers with opportunities to enter that industry. Going a little bit further, economic benefit investments are not just limited to the offshore wind supply chain in this round. We are recognizing other investments in clean energy and energy transition as part of a holistic approach. So pilot projects such as hydrogen or other investments in clean energy economy through the transport or industrial sectors are considered as well as economic benefits. So we've taken a big picture approach and are looking to get the best, brightest, and most creative projects that get us closer to our goals and our vision. Next slide, please. That vision, of course, is a shared vision and would not be complete without proper input from stakeholders. This is so important to building equity in a project's success. We're mandating all proposers present a stakeholder engagement plan. We've even published guiding principles for stakeholder engagement. So in similar fashion to the labor plans, these will include metrics and tracking and really sets a standard for doing business in New York. Not only are the stakeholder engagement plans important to make sure developers are including feedback into the development process, but it's also important that community members and invested stakeholders are always kept in the loop. Not everyone agrees all the time, but no one should be surprised by a project's development. So this is an important part in how the developers come in and communicate with the surrounding community and stakeholders. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the offshore wind requests for proposals have always included environmental mitigation plans, and this remains a very important aspect of the project submission and evaluation. New in this round, proposers must present noise mitigation plans. I also want to note that the $5,000 per megawatt generated $25 million towards wildlife research and monitoring ecosystems last round. So the whole spirit of clean energy transition is for a better environment. So the industry is developed with this really at a cornerstone of project planning. Next slide, please. Similarly, fishery mitigation plans have been an important part of the offshore wind development process. The wind turbines are sharing space with other industries, and there's a significant amount of coordination and planning to exist symbiotically in this space. So both the environmental and fishing have what we call TWIGs, or formal technical working groups. All right, that's all for my time. Thank you for your attention, and I will pass over to Jess to talk about some exciting updates on jobs and workforce.
Thanks so much, Layla. Sal, next slide, please. All right. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Jessica Deely. I lead NYSERDA's Offshore Wind Workforce Development Liaison efforts, as well as stakeholder outreach. For this portion of the webinar, we'll discuss a little more on what we've been doing in the workforce development coordination and research realm, as well as provide a few good nuggets of information surrounding New York State's stakeholder engagement expectations and upcoming events. Next slide, please. Our state is expected to become a central player in the national offshore wind industry. To meet the workforce demands that will be created by the 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind, New York State will require job growth across a number of key occupations. NYSERDA recently funded a workforce gap analysis that identified 117 unique occupations associated with offshore wind development, construction, and operation. One of our initial main questions was, where are we really lacking as a state? Where will we not have individuals ready to work by the time that we'll need them? That's where this slide comes in. Our research team identified 4 occupations within those 117 listed that have a, quote, high workforce gap. What that means is the projected number of workers needed exceeds the size of the existing talent pool within our state. You can see the positions that exist across manufacturing and construction, as well as operation and maintenance, is where we fall a little short and where we will need to begin training folks in higher numbers than we already are as a state. Next slide, please. We share those occupations with you to note an important data point also discovered by our research team that shows the top 10 occupations New York State lacks when it comes to an existing talent pool require apprenticeships, post-secondary, or high school diplomas. These are training programs we can create together and provide to workers in order to ensure we eliminate those gaps. These are training programs that our labor union community can become involved with and get behind. These are training programs that developers can help fund and begin to hire from. Next slide, please. NYSERDA understands that local planners, including educational institutions and other workforce development entities, require a deeper understanding of what types of jobs will be required when they'll be needed. Folks on this webinar from communities may be wondering what institutions are offering programs that I can enroll with. How do I get a job? So what I want to show you now is what at the surface looks like a very busy slide that's a little hard to follow, but I'm going to break it down a bit before speaking to the information. What you're looking at is a bucket of buckets of funding for offshore wind workforce training that total over an impressive $100 million. Funding has been separated into three types: New York State, federal, and private. The column on the left shows the amount of funding and what project or training facility it is associated with. The column on the right shows more specifics about the programs that have been earmarked to receive those funds and begin training workers. It's color coded for you there, so you can see the amount of funding and the initiative that it is associated with. What we're doing now at NYSERDA is tracking all of this effort. How many trainees will be produced and when? Will this fit the needs of our projects by the time that they'll need them? Are these efforts truly beneficial to our priority populations, including disadvantaged communities? And what we're hoping for is to see private developers in our next solicitation become well aware of this workforce training ecosystem and contribute to its success by committing to help fund existing efforts or, if necessary, fund new efforts. New York State already has 714 trade programs listed in our New York eligible training provider list that could be useful for developing an offshore wind workforce. We also identified 12 different wind energy specific training programs across the state, not specific to offshore wind yet, but with transferable training that can be leveraged. All of this to say, we're not starting from scratch. There are brick and mortar institutions out there already that we can build upon. And we're working towards making sure our state's workforce training efforts are coordinated and inclusive. And we want to work with developers who take the successful build out of our already great state assets seriously. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, NYSERDA is working towards centralizing the planning and coordination across workforce stakeholders. One of the ways we intend to help make all of these opportunities accessible and clear and easy to understand is through creating a website that will have an easy to follow interactive map listing each training facility and its location, as well as a list of different occupations that will be needed and paths folks can take to get enrolled. We're also preparing for the second NYSERDA OWTI solicitation, Offshore Wind Training Institute solicitation. That's one that NYSERDA has $10 million for, and SUNY, Stony Brook, and Farmingdale colleges have $10 million for. Before NYSERDA issues our next solicitation, we're engaging with disadvantaged communities and incorporating feedback into our narratives to ensure, again, that these benefits truly help our priority populations. Next slide. Thanks, Sal. Going now to our stakeholder engagement and regional collaboration. Next slide. If you weren't all aware, NYSERDA is super proud. Layla already mentioned it. We're announcing that we published guiding principles to stakeholder engagement. We did this last fall. It's on our website. You can see the link at the bottom of your screen there if you want to access the PDF. Just head to our Connecting with New Yorkers page. These principles outline what we consider the platinum level of engagement with stakeholders. Layla covered it really well. The state wants everyone to know about these efforts and to be a part of our clean energy transition. We are requiring developers to provide us with tracking documents so that we can indeed see when stakeholder groups were engaged and how many people were reached. This way, we hold ourselves accountable and ensuring our clean energy transition is transparent. It's something we should all be proud of and we want folks to be informed about. Next slide, please. One outreach effort NYSERDA leads and wants to make sure you're aware of is our Learning from the Experts web series. Come eat your lunch and listen to industry experts. Upcoming this month, March 30th, we'll be talking about regional offshore wind transmission planning, a hot topic. Info to register is listed there. Head to our announcements and events page. Next slide, please. Our team is also fast at work preparing to lead the next Offshore Wind State of the Science Conference. The last State of the Science Conference was the largest offshore wind environmental conference in the world, and we're really looking forward to the next one. Attendees can expect to hear more about wildlife population baseline studies, ecosystem responses to offshore wind development, and more. The next one is coming up this summer in Tarrytown, New York. You can find more info at the New York State eTwig website. Next slide, please. Speaking Speaking of a twig, a technical working group, Layla already mentioned it before, but we want to reiterate these regional collaborations. New York is proud of the progress being made with our technical working groups. If you're wondering what that even means, mostly it means convening people that are key to a particular area of offshore wind and ensuring everyone knows what each other is doing so that we all stay informed and in step. We've got a technical working group for environmental efforts, fisheries, maritime, jobs and supply chain. NYSERDA also asks developers to have a role in these twigs so that the research and expectations go directly into how these projects are surveyed, built, and operated. I do want to toss it back to our great director, Greg Glampman, now to offer a little bit more intel on our cable study and wrap us up for questions. Greg?
Thank you, Jess. Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat section. We'll try to get to as many as we can. This is our final slide, but I alluded to this offshore wind cables corridor assessment work early in the deck. It was part of the governor's State of the State announcement. And just to frame this a little bit, with the recent Bowen lease auction, we have an understanding both from the new lease areas as well as from incumbent areas where we're likely to get our offshore wind energy. So where will that energy be generated? It was published in the Power Grid study last year, and an understanding of where the interconnection points exist. More work is obviously ongoing on the terrestrial side to make sure that energy that comes in will be able to interconnect and be delivered to customers across New York. And so one of the questions that remains here is, how do we move from those offshore wind projects to those terrestrial points of interconnection? So what constrains cables and where are those constraints? So we've kicked off this offshore wind cables corridor assessment with really two goals in mind. First, to try to understand and document the environmental, technical, stakeholder concerns, risks and impacts associated with undersea and overland cables to support offshore wind generation coming to points of interconnection. We really just want to understand that, document it, and think about it from a state perspective to try to align the agency's thinking in this regard. Again, our intention here is to advance this 9 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2035 in a way that's responsible and cost effective. And so, can we continue to take what I would loosely describe here as a laissez-faire approach to that, where the developers propose where they'll bring their cables in and how they'll interact? Or should we be more proactive in making sure that those cables interact well and provide minimum impact to the environment and stakeholders? So first, we want to understand what and where those constraints are. And then secondarily, we want to try to think about what policy actions could the state undertake to make sure that those projects are advanced efficiently. Again, thinking about the risk premium associated with developers in proposing their own routes, but also making sure that these projects have minimal impacts and we can achieve our renewable energy goals efficiently. Next slide, please. And with that, we're going to wrap up and turn it over to our Q&A session. Again, if you have any questions for us, feel free to send us an email at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov. We have a lot of information on our website, and you can sign up for our email list to make sure that you are receiving information in a timely manner as it's developed. So switching over to our Q&A session, we've had a number of questions come in over the course of the presentation. And I'll start with the first one that came in, which was really around vessels. So the question was, is there also a construction? There's also a construction of there's only one construction vessel one service vessel being constructed currently in the United States that will comply with the Jones Act, and asking about the ability for vessels to be able to support these projects. And so I want to say that Dominion Energy does continue to develop the first Jones Act compliant wind turbine vessel. The vessel is contracted to charter installation of the Sunrise Wind project that was awarded to Ørsted and Eversource, and I think that was mentioned by Cheryl in her presentation. Additionally, private vessel operators are working to develop business plans and investing in Jones Act compliant vessels that can serve the industry's various construction needs. One such example is the Great Lakes Dredge and Docks company, who has been commissioned who has commissioned a Jones Act compliant subsea rock installation vessels. Projects in New York and along the coast are helping to provide guidance and certainty in constructing the needed vessels to make sure that we can service the industry with these good paying jobs. And a couple more that I'll take before passing it over to some of our colleagues. There were some questions around tech, in fact. So one of them is Is it true that wind turbines are too tall to pass under the Verrazano Bridge? The Verrazano Bridge, when you go over it, is a very tall bridge. It's about 230 feet off the Hudson. So these turbines, just to set the stage here, we're looking at offshore wind turbines that can reach, once installed, something close to 1,000 feet. And projects or turbines are getting larger and larger. That's good news because it means the number of positions or the number of turbines we need to generate the energy we're looking for is lower. A lower number of turbines generally means a lower impact on the environment. It also means a decreased cost for the installation. So while these turbines, while we do consider the Verrazano an air draft constrained bridge, there are ways to work around this to make sure that we can get these projects built out of New York ports. Another question is, what will the power losses due to wind turbine and wind farm wakes be in New York regions? And how will existing lease areas interact and shadow new lease areas? So again, this goes to the tech. A lot of the decisions about how developers lay out their farms is contingent upon what wind developers are doing and making sure that they can maximize their design and their efficiencies. BOEM has considered some of this in their considerations of the leases. So the new round of leases do require a setback from adjacent lease areas to make sure this interaction is minimized. But again, this is a design question. There is wake effect, but this is a design consideration by developers who are working in the space. So one for Layla, will comments from the draft RFP be made public?
No, they will not. We have set up on the website, and if you review the draft document, there is a comment form. So you actually go to a web page and you submit your comments, and they are funneled through a specific inbox. They don't come to the whole offshore wind team, and they are, for the most part, anonymized and will not be made public.
Thank you. And I'd like to emphasize also, the RFI is out for comment. We are particularly looking for bidders' feedback on this, but the public is certainly encouraged to weigh in as well with their perspectives. If the RFP should be modified in some way, we'd be happy to hear from you and hear your thinking in that regard. There was a question about whether data is made public from the wind projects themselves. So wind farm, is data from the wind farms made public? So a lot of the data collected by developers is proprietary to them. They purchase that data and they use it for competitive reasons. NYSERDA has deployed 2 offshore wind buoys to collect wind speed data, and that data is publicly available. You can access that through the NYSERDA website. We also do require contractual obligations for data transparency as it relates to what we describe as non-proprietary matters. This in particular refers to things like wildlife. So we want to make sure that information that developers are collecting around wildlife is available to stakeholders and to regulators. It is able to be additive to what the other developers are doing to make sure that we really do understand the implications of these projects on wildlife. So a question for Jess, I think. Offshore wind is in its infant stage in the United States. How can college graduates or students join or prepare for this industry?
Sure, thanks, Greg. And I think the answer is, where would you like to? I think our research team identified 12 different wind energy specific training programs across the state. I mentioned they're not necessarily dedicated to offshore wind, but the training is transferable and can be leveraged. The majority of programs that exist right now and that are being implemented right now are geared towards engineering. But Stony Brook University offers a program geared towards professional services, which includes wind resource assessment, where I started my career, so it's close to my heart, wind project design and optimization, offshore wind project economics and policy, environmental impacts and storage and grid integration. Farmingdale offers a wind program for people with different experience levels. And then there's Suffolk County Community College, which the program and courses aren't yet available, but it's really leaning towards a wind tech school. We've got a lot of GWO facilities coming to the surface. So if you're interested in being a wind tech, but if you're a college graduate and you're really looking to get into the planning and management of these programs, I think researching the developers that are active in the space is important. Look out for internships. And of course, come to our website once we have developed it. You're in the right place right now, coming to our webinar and hearing about this news. We'll of course announce when we have our workforce training website up that will have links to all the accessible programs that you could go to and be a part of. But again, internships are very important as well. Thanks, Greg.
And another one for Layla, I think. So Sal, if you could roll back the deck a little bit, there's been a number of questions on the investment plans and the manner in which we'll be handling the investment plans in the RFP. For example, there's a question about why the $125 million cap on investment plans. And I think just in general, if Layla, if you could spend a little more time on this slide and talk through our approach and the benefits of associating investment plans with the OREC versus independently, and maybe we can answer
Sure.
a couple of questions.
It's going to be slide 21, Sal. So yeah, I also saw that there's a series of questions. So first one I think was about the cap, the 125 million. So just to give a kind of a ballpark of what that could get based on so we employed a similar strategy as this one here as investment plans paired with the OREC RFP in 2020. And based on the returns we got, the level of investment, this 125 million is roughly enough to get the largest of our marquee investments with the public-private fund matching that we're anticipating to get. That's not to say that if there was a project that warranted more than that, we would certainly still consider it. So this is kind of a guideline of the order of magnitude that we're looking to get from these investments. I think there was another question about, yes, we are describing 3 distinct processes. Only the first one is that supply chain linked with the offshore wind procurement. The other 2 are meant to build out the supply chain for tier 2, tier 3, and other subcomponents as those orders fill out. So the first one and in part the second one are for primary components, and the second one, in part the second one, and mostly the third one are for more subcomponent and targeting our local enterprises. Is there another question on that one, Greg, you can point me to?
I'm thumbing through them now. I think that covers them. Thank you, Layla. There was another question in regard to so I had mentioned the power grid study as some work that had been published on the terrestrial grid. You can find the power grid study. It's posted on the I think it's linked to the NYSERDA website, but it's on the Public Service Commission docket as a document that's available. It is a very insightful piece of work. And actually, we're using the information that was developed through the power grid study to inform the undersea cables assessment. So we're relying on that for the terrestrial points of interconnection for consideration, and looking at how do we bring cables between the offshore space and those points of interconnection. But again, it's called the Power Grid Study, and it's available on the PSC website, Public Service Commission, I'm sorry. So there's a question here, maybe this one's for Layla. In NY2, we actually had a requirement around eligible ports. Maybe Layla, you could talk a little bit about the change we have in this one as it relates to the other marquee investments.
Sure. So you are correct. In 2020, we had a list of eligible ports, and there was like a pre-qualification for the ports that could be considered as pairing with the OREC RFP. In the 2022 round, we are not having a designated list of eligible ports, but in fact, these investments can be located anywhere in New York State. So they can be a port, or it can be an inland manufacturing facility, but there is no prescribed list. It's any investment site that a developer finds or a supply chain partner has access to that they would like to develop. It is eligible for bidding as part of the supply chain investment.
I think you haven't heard from Peter Lyons today, but he's one of our staff. Are you online, Peter?
I was trying to get in earlier, but you guys were doing a really fantastic job. So, you know, on all of these points, we're really looking to optimize the funding to grow the supply chain here in New York, from marquee investments all the way down to our local manufacturers. So, you know, like with NY2, you know, providing that optimized baseline that developers and OEMs can charter off of really helps to level the playing field and bring everyone to a like mindset. So we are in a draft phase right now. So if you have comments and suggestions around how these funds can be best optimized, please send those in. we're all ears and working to develop, our hallmark approach of this public-private partnerships that I think New York has really shown a great model off of to develop the industry.
So there was also a question here, Peter, from a consulting firm who's interested in getting involved. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the supply chain database.
Yeah, so I saw some questions come in around, how to connect with developers. One of the key opportunities that currently exists today is the NYSERDA Offshore Wind Supply Chain Database. So this is a database that's housed on our website. We can definitely share the link within the chat function or with folks after the webinar. But the supply chain database is a platform for companies to sign up. With the existing projects and projects moving forward through the New York 3 solicitation, we provide optimized contract tender values that developers or tier one or awarded tier one contractors then have to go and reference that supply chain database list to determine if there are existing New York-based companies that that have the right competencies, the right certifications, and therefore have the capacity to be engaged with to participate. The value in the first two solicitations for a contract tender amount was at the $5 million mark. We're looking to optimize that, and again, please throw comments our way and lowering that amount, not only to look at small to medium-sized enterprises, but also how do we more effectively enable engagement and participation with MWBE manufacturers and service providers, as well as service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. So we also reference Empire State Development's MWBE certified list, New York City EDC's certified list, as well as Office of General Services SDVOB list, all in a manner to showcase the great companies that are here in New York and are ready and willing partners to grow this industry.
Great, thank you. We have a number of questions that I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to because we're just about out of time, but there have been a few folks who have asked about commercial operation date, and maybe this is for both Cheryl and Layla for wrap up, but in terms of commercial operation date, I know, Cheryl, you ran through the list of them for the existing contracts, but there's also an interest in knowing more about how it applies to the RFP. Want to both of you chime in on that?
Sure, I don't want to speak for the RFP necessarily, but certainly there are a number of ongoing activities in the space that can benefit from capacity building and partnership that would certainly, I would think, strengthen a proposal for any future solicitations. In the timeline that I presented, there's a lot of activity in the next 5 years with, the latter half of the next decade to develop these projects and meet our goals. That is open and free for a lot of these projects to continue and these projects to benefit from the groundbreaking and first people on the ground to develop this industry. And so I would say that there's lots of time, but that time is all really valuable and accounted for in the sense that we have these goals to meet by 2035 and want to make sure that these are done responsibly and with all of the right things in mind. So I don't know, Layla, if you had anything else to add to that, but that would be my interpretation of reaching our 9 gigawatt goal by 2035.
Yeah, I might only just add, with the RFP, we consider the COD not just for what it is, but the likelihood of success and the robustness and quality of the project to get to that COD. We take a look at under that project viability that I mentioned.
Well, thank you all. It's now a little after 4, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But we appreciate your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at Offshore Wind at NYSERDA.ny.gov. Be happy to get back with you. And in our next quarterly update, we'll be bringing some other information leading into our environmental and fisheries and our stakeholder engagement processes with the regional entities. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.